Tobias Rathjen was born in 1977. A German citizen, Rathjen lived a life of isolation and involuntary celibacy. He developed deeply misogynistic and racist beliefs, stating in a troubled manifesto that certain ethnic groups were destructive. In the same manifesto, Rathjen called for the absolute annihilation of the nations of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iran, various Middle Eastern nations. He also called for the annihilation of Laos and Vietnam, as anti-socialist and anti-communist rhetoric flows from the mouths of most far-right extremists. He fell into the trap of fascism and xenophobia that has seen an upsurge in the 21st century, and there was no climbing out of the pit. On November 6, 2019, Tobias Rathjen wrote to the public general prosecutor about his racist, terroristic beliefs and intentions. He was ignored. No action was taken. Tobias Rathjen fired approximately 9 shots at the Midnight Shisha Bar in Germany. He then drove to the Arena Bar and Cafe and fired more shots. Rathjen targeted establishments known to be frequented by immigrants. He then returned home, murdered his mother, and took his own life. In total, 11 people died and 5 more were injured. The community mourned the tragic loss of life. Anti-racist protesters marched in the streets. Candlelight vigils were held, and artists memorialized the dead with murals. The murals honor the victims, but they also remind the community that the authorities were informed about the shooter by the shooter himself and that nothing was done. The murals also remind the community to stay vigilant and stand together. Graffiti is art that is written, drawn, carved, or painted on a public surface for public viewing. When one thinks of graffiti, one usually thinks of a large wall that has been adorned with a spray-painted landscape or portrait. However, the boundaries of graffiti and definition of graffiti are so all-encompassing that one might also describe a scrawled message in a public restroom, a signature in wet cement, or a declaration of love in a tree as graffiti as well. Graffiti is generally created without express permission from those who claim the land. Because of this, graffiti can also be described as vandalism, but vandalism with style or purpose. If graffiti art can be monetized, it can be mainstreamed, such as with popular artists like Banksy and Basquiat before him. If it cannot be monetized, then it will be portrayed by both private property-owning capitalists and the state as a nuisance to the neighborhood at best, or a degenerate threat to public decency at worst. Graffiti, either as vandalism or art, has always existed. History has preserved a number of ancient pieces of graffiti, including caricatures of politicians. The ancient Romans carved graffiti on walls. Graffiti was also common in ancient Greece and the Mayan civilization. Graffiti can be made just for kicks, a name written on the subway train, a dirty limerick on the wall, but graffiti can also have a more significant message to convey to those who come across it. A social message, a political message, socio-political graffiti. Because of its subversive nature, graffiti lends itself to anti-establishment messaging, to resistance against harmful societal norms. When speaking out is illegal or dangerous, then only an illegal or dangerous form of message is possible. As explained by Iain McIntyre, author of How to Make Trouble and Influence People, the streets have consistently given a public canvas to otherwise marginalized artists and malcontents. In this context, malcontents is not meant negatively. Why should marginalized people be content with the status quo? If the state finds a form of protest against itself acceptable, then the state does not consider this protest threatening to its power. If the state finds a form of protest against itself unacceptable, then the protesters are probably engaging in a more meaningful protest. Vandalism or not, one might argue that we have no moral authority to tell people, especially marginalized people, how to protest in public or how to conduct public funerals. Society does not build a platform for marginalized people to speak. There are social and economic imbalances. Therefore, it is both reasonable and acceptable for marginalized people to build their own platforms. Demanding that people work within the system is extremely condescending when the system itself is not working for the people. Another way of looking at it is that the state and corporate ownership of the city is not more legitimate than the community's claim on the city. The state's claim is either less legitimate or only as legitimate. Corporations force their version of art on communities every day, with every billboard. The state forces its version of art on communities every day as well, with every piece of propaganda. What do you think public statues of presidents are? State propaganda is far more harmful and insidious than graffiti, but only one is illegal. Once you realize why that is, you might be less inclined to side with the state on this matter. In summary, graffiti is not simply vandalism. It is a shot across the bow and a battle cry for those unable to have their voices heard through any other means. Graffiti is the language and politics of those who do not have the connections or capital to reach people through means approved by the state. When nobody else will listen and people look away, staring at the clouds instead, a radical political graffiti artist will paint the sky. Although graffiti has always existed in one form or another, modern graffiti often exists in service of urban hacking, reclaiming communities from corporate interests that effectively own and exploit those communities. Urban hacking also reclaims these communities from the state and the agents of state violence and capitalism, the police. As explained in the book Political Graffiti in Critical Times, in the contemporary process of capitalist urbanization around the globe, there is an increasing mobilization of cultural producers, including street artists, graffitists, and muralists, in oppositional movements and grassroots collectives against the wholesale instrumentalization of culture, art, and creativity. Urban social movements emerged against the increasing commoditization, polarization, and enclosures of the urban commons. Seeking visibility, they handle graffiti as an infrapolitical mode of protest. They serve as a means of communicating a variety of socio-political issues relevant to the claims of the urban social movements, expressing political demands, social commentaries, criticism, protest, and rejection of or agreement with social changes. For many street activists, the act of doing graffiti stems from the imperative of the right to the city. Let's look at some common targets of activist graffiti artists. Anti-racist graffiti is highly prevalent in major metropolitan areas in the United States because the makeup and demographics of these cities were created through explicit, state-sponsored segregation and absence of generational wealth. The result has been a racialized poverty that has existed for a very long time and shows little sign of ending. In the United States, Black Americans are often memorialized when their lives are taken by the police. These memorials are testimonies of a community. They are both heartfelt remembrance and activism. Unfortunately, racist and fascist graffiti also exist, but graffiti that enforces the status quo of socioeconomic hierarchies is far less common than graffiti that challenges socioeconomic hierarchies. The privileged, the well-to-do, have fewer cares in the world. They have fewer reasons to fight back, fewer reasons to risk being arrested. Fewer reasons to work outside the system when the system always works for them. The favored people also live in neighborhoods that are so obsessed with property values and their conformist aesthetic of the suburb that the community will ask for any graffiti, regardless of its politics or values, to be removed immediately. That means privileged people have to go downtown to make their racist graffiti seen, and that graffiti does not last long. See, racist or fascist graffiti usually does not last long in a minority-majority community. These communities tend to rally together when there is a threat, including the existence of racist or fascist graffiti. Because these communities have their fair share of graffiti artists, these artists tend to paint over encroaching racist or fascist graffiti. As income inequality widens, anti-capitalist graffiti becomes more and more common. Graffiti, by its mere existence, opposes the enclosure of public spaces by private enterprise. The Cold War solidified anti-socialist and anti-communist sentiment among the people in the West, particularly in the United States. Graffiti allows for public displays of anti-capitalist sentiments without requiring the permission of the capitalist mass media or the state. In the 21st century, the state's first priority is the protection of private property rights in service of neoliberal capitalism. With this perspective in mind, you can imagine how much the state abhors graffiti. On top of the vandalization of private property in and of itself, radical graffiti often explicitly condemns the social or economic structures that the state supports. It's a double whammy in which the message is often anti-capitalist and anti-authoritarian, and the medium itself, due to its illegality, is also anti-authoritarian. According to Bill Posters, author of the Street Art Manual, street art and graffiti can be creative forms of resistance to what Guy Debord, the French philosopher and founder of the Situationist International, called the society of the spectacle, in other words, consumer culture. The recent escalation of fascist rhetoric has been countered with anti-fascist activism, and the recent capacity to film fascist actors, meaning the police, has built solidarity among their most common victims. During the 2020 riots, broadcasting the community's demands and concerns was challenging because corporate and state propaganda demonized the riots as mindless violence instead of communities lashing out in understandable pain. Riots are spontaneous, unplanned, and illegal. Due to the nature of the riots, there is no spokesperson, no official communications between the rioters and the media, except through anonymity. Messaging must be pushed through alternative means, in hopes of photographers bringing the message to the mainstream. Graffiti on state-owned property, such as a police station, forces the media to photograph the messages, slogans, demands, and concerns of the community. Although little can be conveyed through a simple slogan like ACAB, we live in the internet age in which people can look up the term and potentially learn more about police abolition. Tagging police property also reminds the police that the people can overrun them whenever they choose. Sometimes the message is more clear, such as this graffiti in Kenosha: "You have stolen more than we could ever loot." Uprisings, riots, and revolutions always contain expropriation of goods from the more wealthy. The enclosure of land by the wealthy and by the state is all the justification needed to take back what was once held by the people, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. This simple message makes it clear that the rioters do not consider this an immoral act when one considers their own oppression. Another recent controversial event was the construction of the border wall, or more accurately the border fence, or slats. But every wall is a blank canvas, and some walls are more tempting to the activist graffiti artists than others. Activist graffiti artists have adorned the wall with political statements opposing its construction, and those who champion it in the first place. According to the author of Conflict Graffiti, John Lennon, but not that John Lennon, like walls, graffiti are both physical and symbolic. Counteracting the nationalistic performance of border walls, graffiti can be read as ritualistic counter-performances that cover this blankness with images and words, creating narratives of resistance that rhetorically make marginalized individuals, the women and men who wrote the graffiti, visible. The culminating visualization of protest is a testament to what we already know but must be consistently reminded of. Walls can be breached, toppled, destroyed. For all their perceived invincibility, they are vulnerable to collectivized hands that want to tear them down. Graffiti subversively interacts with the state, often turning the emblem of state power into a symbol of resistance. Yet another recent event that has attracted graffiti is the reversal of Roe v. Wade and abortion bans in several states. Jane's Revenge, an activist group, is responsible for a number of incidents that vandalized and tagged institutions that supported the reversal. "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you," is both slogan and threat. In the face of the reactionary movement against reproductive rights, activists are not backing down, and this graffiti burns that message into the popular consciousness. This next section is educational, not instructional. In other words, I am not instructing you to engage in vandalism or any other illegal activity. Discussing a topic is not an explicit call to action. Graffiti artists have an unlimited canvas, but radical political graffiti artists tend to choose walls and other surfaces with a lot of foot traffic. So, a bridge, for example. Everyone goes across a bridge, everyone travels under bridges. Or a wall in a neighborhood with a large population but slow police response time. According to Recipes for Disaster, the best targets are in areas that are very busy during the day but practically deserted and unguarded at night. One-way streets can be safer than two-way streets, as traffic can only be expected from one direction. One method for maintaining anonymity while spray painting is to wear a disguise and plan a cover story. Someone in a black hoodie with an Anarchy A on it marching confidently toward the side of a police station is going to get arrested. It makes more sense for the graffiti artist to look like they are doing something else. For example, the graffiti artist could walk their dog in unassuming suburbanite clothes, carry a bag that is seemingly full of dog owner's stuff but actually contains the tools required for the job. Graffiti artists try to use their environment to maximize their message. For example, this is a military recruitment billboard that has been vandalized to eliminate its power. The United States military tends to recruit low-income Americans without a college education. It's one of the reasons why offering free college or removing student debt frightens the state so much. The artist reminds poverty-stricken Americans that dying for the state is still much worse than their current situation. Sandblasting some surfaces, like a brick wall, is pretty easy, but graffiti from billboards is more challenging to remove without also ruining the advertisement in the process. Another effective use of graffiti can be found on plaques and statues. A commemorative plaque needs to have its graffiti removed carefully so as not to damage it. The same goes for statues. Big, expensive statues of colonizers, slave owners, war criminals, or worst of all, American presidents, which are sometimes all three. As explained by Mitja Velikonja, author of Post-Socialist Graffiti in the Balkans and Central Europe, the understanding of graffiti and street art oscillates between cynical rejection on the one side and the acknowledgement of their emancipatory potentials on the other. Some people will say, "You wouldn't feel this way if someone sprayed political messages you don't agree with." Yeah, sure, I think bad things are bad and good things are good. This is not hypocrisy, because the objection or approval is never the physical spray paint can, a morally neutral inanimate object. It's the content of the message. Oh, you like baseball bats when they're hitting home runs, but not when they're killing Glenn from The Walking Dead. What a hypocrite. Some people will also say, you wouldn't feel this way if property you own was vandalized. And to that I say, you think I own property? I side with the concerns of people who have real concerns. I do not side with white suburban grandfathers yelling at people to go back to where they came from. Unpleasant, selfish people who have no stake in the plight of the poor living an hour away downtown. Get off my lawn is not a concern of a serious critic of society and humanity. So let's be serious people. Hi everybody. If you like what I do, make sure to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you never miss an episode. Also, check out my Patreon link. See you soon.